Long before the modern age, before tall cities and shining machines, humanity carried a secret buried deep in the shadows of history. The world today remembers kings, empires, and wars written in books, but there is another history that was never told, a hidden chapter guarded by silence. It was the story of the ancient warships, weapons so powerful that even the bravest leaders of the past chose not to speak of them. These ships were not carved from wood or forged with iron. They were built with knowledge that should not have belonged to early humanity, knowledge that looked as if it had fallen from the stars themselves. And yet, they were real. They were hidden, buried beneath oceans, mountains, and deserts, sleeping while the centuries passed. Why did they exist? Who were they meant to fight? These were questions even the oldest myths could not answer. Some said they were made to fight gods. Others whispered that they were built to defend against something far worse. In forgotten temples and broken ruins, there are symbols scratched into stone, marks that never matched any language of man. For a long time, scholars called them nonsense, random scratches of primitive people. But hidden among those marks are designs of weapons, blueprints of ships larger than any building of that time. How could humans, thousands of years ago, imagine such things? Unless, of course, they did not imagine at all. Perhaps they remembered. Perhaps they built. The oceans hold more secrets than the land, and beneath those dark waters lies the truth. Fishermen in the Pacific once told tales of giant shadows moving below, shapes too large to be whales or rocks. Sailors swore they saw lights flicker under the waves, like stars drowning in the sea. Most laughed at these stories, but every myth grows from a seed of truth. Deep below, a colossal ship rested in silence, its body sealed in layers of stone and coral. It was not sleeping. It was waiting. Generations passed. Humanity forgot. Kingdoms rose and fell, religions spread, nations were born, and still the ships remained in the dark. The few who knew the truth became silent keepers. They hid their knowledge, passing it only to a chosen few, a secret carried like a curse. They feared what would happen if the world discovered the truth too soon. For these ships were not just weapons of war. They were warnings, a shield for a threat that had not yet returned. The builders, whoever they were, had left them behind because they knew something. They knew that one day, the enemy would come again. Sometimes, the earth gave hints. In the deserts of Africa, explorers once found a canyon wall split open after an earthquake. Inside the rock lay metal, smooth and cold, shaped with perfect lines that no ancient hand could make. The explorers took notes and made drawings, but when they tried to tell the world, their voices were silenced. The canyon was sealed, the entrance destroyed, and the reports vanished. The secret was buried again. Who had the power to hide this? Who wanted the truth kept away? Only the silent keepers knew, and they never spoke. But time changes everything. Technology grew. Satellites scanned the seas, submarines dived deeper than ever, and radar systems touched places once unreachable. And in those deep scans, shadows appeared. Massive structures, larger than cities, shaped not by nature but by design. The scientists argued and denied, governments closed the files, but whispers began to spread. The ancient war machines are still here. And they are not dead. Legends in different lands speak of the same mystery. In the Himalayas, people tell of a mountain that shakes every 100 years, as if something inside is alive. In South America, old stories describe fire from the ground that glowed like the heart of a machine. In the Arctic, travelers found tunnels of metal beneath the ice, tunnels leading to nowhere, or perhaps leading to something sleeping. These were not accidents. They were not random. They were pieces of the same truth scattered across the world. And now, in the modern age, the silence is breaking. Strange signals have begun to rise from deep places where no human could reach. Faint at first, like whispers in the dark, but growing louder each year. At first, scientists believed it was natural, echoes of earthquakes or volcanic movement. But the signals are too precise, repeating in cycles, carrying patterns like a voice trying to speak. Those who study them closely feel uneasy. Because the more they listen, the clearer it becomes. The signals are not random. They are a countdown. Something buried is trying to wake. For thousands of years, humanity thought it ruled alone under the sky. But what if that was never true? What if the old myths of Star Wars and fallen gods were not just stories, but memories? The ships were not built to be forgotten. They were built to wait. And now, after ages of silence, the waiting is almost over. The ground trembles, the seas stir, and the shadows of the past move once more. Humanity has lived in peace because the enemy has been absent. But the builders of the warships knew the truth. Peace was never permanent. Peace was only borrowed time. And now, time is running out. For centuries the ancient warships slept under oceans, deserts, and mountains, silent guardians of a forgotten age. Humanity built cities above them, drilled into the earth, and crossed the skies without ever realizing what lay beneath their feet. But silence never lasts forever. In the year when the world thought it had mapped every inch of the planet, something strange began in the Pacific Ocean. A research team aboard a quiet vessel noticed an unusual reading. At first it seemed like a mistake in their instruments, a strange pulse rising from the deep sea floor, too regular to be natural yet too powerful to ignore. The leader of the team asked for the signal to be checked again and again, but the result was always the same. Something below was alive with energy. The scientists thought it might be volcanic activity, perhaps magma channels opening. But one of them, a young technician, whispered words that no one wanted to hear. "This is not natural. This is a machine." The crew grew uneasy. Night after night they recorded the pulses, and they grew stronger. One evening the ocean around the ship began to stir. Waves rose even though the weather was calm. The instruments on board screamed with warnings. Then, without any warning, the sea floor shook with a force that rattled every plate and glass on the vessel. The researchers ran to the deck and stared in shock. The ocean itself was rising, not as a wave but as something massive pushing upward from below. Black water churned and boiled as the top of a colossal structure broke the surface. It was like the back of a giant, covered in coral and stone, but too smooth and sharp to be natural. Lights flickered across its body, faint at first, then brighter, glowing with colors no one had ever seen in the ocean. The scientists scrambled for cameras and radios, but their equipment failed. Signals went dead, batteries drained, and computers shut down. It was as if the thing below was drinking all energy around it. In panic, the crew tried to sail away, but the sea itself pulled them back, currents twisting like the arms of a giant hand. Then the object broke free from the water with a deafening roar. A mountain of metal, taller than the research ship itself, rose higher and higher. It was not a rock. It was a warship. Its body stretched into the sky, plated with strange armor that had survived centuries underwater. Great towers lined its sides, and glowing vents poured steam into the night sky. The researchers could only stare in silence, their fear louder than their voices. Far away on land, seismographs recorded the event as a massive earthquake, but the scientists who had seen it knew the truth. Governments moved quickly. Within hours, the research team was detained, their recordings seized, their ship silenced. Official reports declared it a natural eruption, nothing more than shifting tectonic plates. But the witnesses who saw the ship with their own eyes knew they had looked at something not from this age. They whispered to each other that the past was waking, and that humanity had no control over what was coming next. As the Pacific ship settled on the surface, it did not move. It simply floated like a dead giant, silent again but alive with strange energy. Birds would not fly near it. Fish avoided the waters around it. The ocean grew quiet, as if all life feared its presence. Satellites caught images before governments erased them. Across the world, on secret channels, those images spread. A massive black ship rising from the sea, its armor cracked but glowing faintly, its weapons hidden but terrifying. For those who understood the myths, it was a sign. For the hidden keepers of history, it was a warning. The event shook the world, but the world did not know the truth. To most people it was nothing but a rumor, a mystery buried in fake news. But in the quiet halls of power, leaders gathered in secret rooms. They argued, they shouted, but none could deny what the data showed. An ancient warship had awakened. And if one had risen, then surely others would follow. Where were they? How many were there? Could they be controlled? No one had answers. All they knew was that something older than all nations had returned. While the leaders argued, whispers traveled faster than their lies. Sailors reported strange lights under the Atlantic. Miners in Asia heard metal ringing deep below the earth. In deserts, sand shifted as if something massive was moving beneath. It was no longer a question of if. The question now was when. The ship in the Pacific did not stay silent forever. After days of stillness, it released a pulse so powerful that radio signals failed across half the globe. The pulse carried a message, not in words but in a frequency so precise that only machines could record it. Scientists struggled to decode it, and when they did, they grew pale. The message was simple, repeated in endless cycles: "We are awake." The world stood on the edge of fear and wonder. Was this a gift from the past, a shield built to protect humanity? Or was it a warning that humanity was never meant to survive what was coming? No one knew. But one truth was clear. The first warship had awakened, and it was only the beginning. The shadows of the forgotten past had broken the surface, and the future of humanity would never be the same again. The awakening of the first warship did not go unnoticed. While humans argued and panicked on Earth, signals from the rising giant traveled far beyond the atmosphere. Radio waves, pulses of energy, and strange vibrations escaped into the dark sky, racing across the void of space faster than humanity could understand. The scientists on Earth thought they were the only ones listening. They were wrong. In distant corners of the galaxy, other civilizations heard the whispers. For them, the signal was not a mystery. It was a warning. They had heard it before, in times so old that even their own history books treated it as legend. The moment the pulse reached them, silence fell across their councils. Leaders and elders remembered the stories told by their ancestors, of a race that once defied the darkness with machines of war that could shake the stars. They remembered humanity. Far beyond Earth, on a planet that glowed with 3 suns, an alien council gathered. Their voices trembled as they replayed the signal. One elder spoke softly, his words carrying fear. "The guardians of Earth have stirred." The younger members looked confused. They knew Earth only as a primitive world, a small blue planet with simple machines and fragile weapons. How could such a race awaken guardians? The elder explained that humanity was never as simple as it seemed. Long ago, when the galaxy trembled under the threat of an ancient enemy, the humans had fought back with a fury that surprised even the stars. Their bodies were weak, their lives short, but their will was unbroken. And so they had built machines, massive warships hidden on their homeworld, not only as weapons, but as a message to anyone who would come again. In another part of the galaxy, a species of traders intercepted the same signal. For them, it was not a tale of hope but a nightmare. Their ancestors had once tried to conquer Earth, long before human history was written, and they had barely escaped with their lives. They remembered the light of the warships tearing through the skies, the fury of a species that refused to kneel. Now, as they listened to the echo of the awakening, they shook with fear. "The humans have not forgotten," one whispered. "Their machines are alive again." For these traders, it was not Earth that was in danger, but anyone foolish enough to challenge it. But not all who heard the signal trembled. In the cold void beyond the spiral arm, another civilization watched with sharp interest. They had waited for this. For centuries they had scanned Earth, waiting for the day the ships would rise again. To them, the warships were not guardians but prey. They believed that if the humans once defeated their ancestors, now would be the time to claim revenge. Their fleets stirred, their factories lit with fire, and their leaders swore they would crush the warships before they could awaken fully. In their arrogance, they forgot the lesson their ancestors had learned. The humans never built weapons they could not use. Back on Earth, humanity still struggled to understand the meaning of the first ship. Scientists decoded fragments of the pulse, and to their shock, they discovered that the signal was not only leaving Earth, but also bouncing back from space. Something, or someone, was answering. The responses were faint but clear, hidden in the background noise of the stars. Governments tried to block the discovery, but the whispers leaked. Astronomers across the world noticed repeating patterns in their telescopes, as if coded voices were speaking across light years. Humanity was no longer alone in the conversation. The hidden keepers, those who carried fragments of the old truth, grew restless. They had always known that the warships were more than weapons. They were also beacons, built to call out when the time came. The keepers remembered the words carved into stone tablets, words that had been mocked by historians. When the guardians rise, the stars will listen. Now those words were alive. The stars were listening indeed. The keepers feared what would come next, because listening was never enough. Once the stars heard, they always answered. Meanwhile, ordinary people began to see strange lights in the night sky. Bright flares moved in patterns that no satellite could explain. Pilots reported objects shadowing their planes before vanishing into darkness. Amateur radio operators picked up voices that were not human, voices that repeated strange rhythms that matched the pulse of the awakened warship. The world governments tried to calm the people, declaring it all natural or fake, but the truth could not be buried. The warships were awake, and the universe was already responding. Across the galaxy, the whispers grew louder. Civilizations debated, argued, and remembered. Some saw the awakening of Earth's guardians as hope, that humanity would again rise as defenders against the ancient enemy that had once threatened all life. Others saw only danger, fearing that humanity would use its warships not to protect but to dominate. And some, hungry and reckless, began to prepare for war, eager to test their strength against the forgotten soldiers of Earth. On Earth, only a handful understood the full weight of what was happening. Humanity had awakened something not only powerful but loud, something that shouted into the void of space. We are not dead. We are ready. And in the dark of the cosmos, where old enemies waited with patient hunger, that message was heard clearly. The whispers across the stars were no longer whispers. They were warnings. And the galaxy was listening. The awakening of the first warship shook the world, but the whispers across the stars shook humanity even more. Governments could no longer deny the truth. Something old and powerful had risen from the depths, and the universe had heard its call. Yet instead of unity, humanity fell into arguments and fear. In secret chambers beneath great cities, leaders gathered. Some wanted to claim the warship as a weapon of power, a tool to make their nations unstoppable. Others trembled at the thought of awakening machines they could not control. The debates grew heated. If we do nothing, the enemy will come, one leader said. If we touch the ships, they may destroy us first, another answered. No one knew which was worse. In the streets, ordinary people whispered the rumors. Some believed the ship was a sign of hope, a guardian built by their ancestors to defend them. They spoke of destiny, of humanity finally rising to its true place among the stars. Others feared the ship was a curse, a ghost from the past that would only bring war and ruin. Protests broke out. Crowds demanded answers, but governments offered only silence and half-truths. The warship floating in the Pacific became the center of the world's imagination. Pilots flew too close and vanished without trace. Satellites tried to scan its interior but returned corrupted data. It was as if the ship itself refused to be understood. Scientists begged for access, but the military stood guard. Every great power wanted control, yet none dared to attack it, for fear of awakening its wrath. And still, strange pulses radiated from the ship, traveling across oceans and skies. Each pulse spread unease. Radios hissed, compasses twisted, even human minds felt sudden headaches and visions when the energy grew strong. Some said the ship was speaking, testing the world, reaching into the minds of those who dared to listen. Amid the chaos, a hidden order stepped from the shadows. They called themselves the Keepers. For generations they had passed down knowledge of the ancient warships, guarding secrets written on tablets, scrolls, and lost records. Now they revealed themselves to world leaders, warning that the warships were not mere tools of war but guardians built for a single purpose: to face an enemy that once came from the stars. The Keepers spoke of a forgotten war, a time before recorded history when humanity was nearly destroyed. Only by building the Guardians did their ancestors survive. The enemy was beaten back but never destroyed. The ships were left behind for this moment, the keepers said. The moment when the enemy returns. The words unsettled the leaders. If true, then humanity stood on the edge of a second war, one far greater than anything they had ever known. Yet some leaders doubted. Why should we trust you? They demanded of the keepers. Perhaps you invented this story to frighten us into obedience. But the keepers had proof. They revealed maps of hidden warships across the globe, resting beneath deserts, locked in mountains, sealed in ice. They showed ancient carvings that matched the strange symbols glowing faintly on the Pacific ship's hull. They revealed records of the enemy, described as shadows that devoured worlds, enemies that had promised to return. The revelation spread fear. If the keepers spoke truth, then humanity's future was not its own. It was tied to a war that had started long before its history was written. Some leaders demanded immediate awakening of all ships, to prepare for the coming storm. Others urged patience, warning that rushing could trigger disaster. The arguments turned to threats. The nations stood on the edge of war with each other, even as a greater war approached from the stars. Meanwhile, ordinary people began to experience strange dreams. Some dreamed of stars burning, of vast machines locked in battle beyond the sky. Others saw visions of humanity's ancestors, standing before the first warships as they sealed them away. A quiet belief grew among the masses that the ships were alive, not just machines but something greater, something that carried memory and purpose. People began to gather at sites where the warships were rumored to rest, forming cults and movements, praying to the Guardians as if they were gods. The leaders tried to crush these gatherings, but they only grew stronger. The Pacific ship finally stirred again. For weeks it had floated silent, but now its lights burned brighter. A great rumble shook the waters as its weapons shifted for the first time in thousands of years. The sky above it darkened, and thunder rolled without a storm. People on nearby coasts fell to their knees, convinced the end was near. Yet the ship did not attack. Instead, it released another pulse into the sky, stronger than before. The pulse carried data, patterns, and signals too advanced for human machines to fully understand. But the keepers did. They translated part of it, and their words froze the hearts of all who heard. The enemy is near. Panic swept the world. Some called for unity, demanding that humanity stand together as one. Others rushed to build weapons, fearing the warships would turn against them. Governments plotted in shadows, each trying to secure control over the awakened giant. But no one realized the truth. Control was impossible. The warships were not servants. They were guardians with their own will, answering only to the purpose for which they were built. Humanity could choose to stand with them, or be judged by them. The leaders argued. The people prayed. The keepers warned. And above them all, the Pacific warship watched in silence, as if waiting to see whether humanity would rise together or fall apart. For the enemy was not yet here, but the signals had already been received. Time was running short. The Pacific warship was only the beginning. Once it had awakened, others began to stir in silence, hidden across the world. Humanity believed the first was unique, but the truth was far greater. Beneath deserts, within frozen lands, and under mountains that had stood for ages, ancient warships prepared to rise. The earth itself seemed restless. Seismographs recorded quakes without cause, oceans shifted without storms, and deep caverns echoed with metallic groans. It was as if the planet had carried a heartbeat all along, and now that heartbeat was growing louder. In the Sahara, a sandstorm raged for 3 days and 3 nights. When the dust cleared, what remained was not the same desert. A great metal surface stretched across the dunes, shining under the sun like the back of a buried titan. The people who lived nearby swore that they heard a deep hum beneath the ground, a hum that made their bones shake. Days later, the sand split apart, and a colossal shape rose upward. A warship the size of a mountain broke free, its armor covered in strange engravings that glowed like fire. The sky above darkened, and lightning struck the ground as if the earth itself bowed to its awakening. In the Arctic, explorers discovered cracks in the endless ice. From below, a blue light pulsed steadily, melting ancient glaciers. Soon the frozen sea erupted as another guardian tore itself free. This ship was different, sleeker, with wings like blades stretching from its sides. It hovered above the ground, supported by engines that roared like thunder. The ice shattered around it, and those who saw it from a distance thought the gods of old had returned to walk the earth. Mountains, too, could no longer hide their secrets. In the Himalayas, villagers heard the trembling before they saw it. Entire cliffs split open, revealing a cavern of steel buried deep inside. Slowly, with groaning echoes that shook valleys, a warship crawled out of the mountain itself. Snow and rock tumbled as it freed itself, standing taller than the peaks around it. Its engines burned like suns, casting shadows across the land. Pilgrims who once prayed to the mountains now bowed to the giant rising from within them. Every corner of the world reported similar events. Some warships rose from rivers, others from volcanoes long thought extinct. Each ship was unique, designed for a different kind of war. Some carried massive cannons that turned with slow menace, others released drones like swarms of metal insects. Some floated silently, almost like spirits of steel, while others roared with fire and power. But they all shared the same pulse, the same rhythm that echoed across the globe and into space, a single message that grew stronger with every awakening. Humanity had not been forgotten. The people of Earth stood divided in awe and fear. Some cheered, believing the guardians had come to protect them. They watched the skies and felt hope that humanity would survive the enemy that was yet to come. Others trembled, fearing the warships were not guardians but executioners, waking to judge whether humanity was still worthy. In cities, crowds gathered on rooftops, pointing at the glowing giants on the horizon. In secret bunkers, leaders whispered strategies, hoping to control the machines but realizing more and more that control was impossible. The keepers warned that the awakening was not random. "They rise for a reason," one keeper told the council. "The enemy is near." The warships were built to wake only when the shadow of war touches Earth again. Their time is now, because our time is almost over. Few wanted to believe these words, but as satellites showed strange objects moving at the edge of the solar system, silence filled the rooms of power. Perhaps the keepers were right. Perhaps the warships had awakened because the threat had returned. The awakening was not peaceful. The earth cracked, oceans roared, and storms gathered around the rising giants. Entire cities trembled when the ground split open to release what had been hidden beneath for thousands of years. And yet, for all the destruction, the warships did not attack. They stood silent, watching, their weapons pointed at the sky, as if waiting for an enemy only they could see. People across the world began to understand. The warships had not been built for humanity itself. They had been built to face something greater. Still, fear ruled. Nations sent fleets and aircraft to surround the awakened guardians. Jets circled above them, warships shadowed them at sea, soldiers stood with weapons raised. But the guardians did not answer violence with violence. They ignored humanity's attempts to test them, as if human weapons were less than dust compared to their own. One jet that flew too close to the Pacific Guardian vanished in a flash of light, its wreckage never found. After that, no one dared to provoke them further. The warships had shown only a glimpse of their power, and it was enough to silence even the boldest generals. The rise of each guardian sent new pulses across space. Civilizations beyond the stars felt the vibrations. Some saw them as a warning and prepared their fleets in fear. Others saw them as a challenge and sharpened their weapons for conquest. The galaxy had not forgotten the old war, and the return of the Guardians was a message that the game was beginning again. On Earth, the people waited in suspense. Would the Guardians stand with them? Would they protect humanity, or abandon it as unworthy of their builder's legacy? The Keepers believed the answer would come soon. "The Guardians are awake," they said. "But they are not yet moving. They are waiting for the enemy to arrive." The warships rose one by one, until dozens stood across the world. Their shadows stretched across oceans, deserts, and mountains. Humanity could no longer deny them. The guardians of the forgotten past had returned, and with their return came the promise of a war older than memory. The world held its breath, watching the silent giants that now dotted the horizon. The warships had risen, and soon humanity would learn why. The warships had risen, and the world stood in silence, but the true terror was not their awakening. The real fear came when the keepers finally revealed what their ancestors had left hidden. In secret chambers lit by the glow of old records, they told humanity the truth about the forgotten enemy. Thousands of years ago, before written history, before empires and kingdoms, Earth was not alone. From the darkness between stars came a race known only as the Devourers. They were not explorers or conquerors in the way humans understood. They were something far worse, beings that consumed worlds. Their fleets descended on planets like a storm, stripping everything, from metals in the crust to the life that grew upon it. No negotiation was possible, no mercy was given. They devoured everything until nothing remained but dust. The keepers explained that humanity's ancestors faced this enemy long before history was carved in stone. The war nearly ended before it began, for the Devourers were countless, and their weapons burned with power greater than any the world had seen. Yet humanity refused to bow. Fragile and small compared to their enemy, humans turned their rage into creation. They built the warships, machines so immense and terrible that they shook the heavens when they flew. With these guardians, humanity struck back. The war was long and brutal, but finally, the Devourers were pushed away. They did not die, for such an enemy could never truly be destroyed. Instead, they retreated into the void, leaving only a promise that echoed through the stars: "We will return." The keepers showed fragments of this past carved into ancient tablets. The symbols matched the glowing marks now burning on the Awakened ships. The stories told of battles fought above oceans, of skies torn apart by fire, of cities reduced to ash. Humanity barely survived. But they did survive, and before the warships were sealed, their builders left instructions. The guardians would sleep, hidden beneath the earth and sea, waiting for the signal that the enemy had returned. Only then would they rise again. The keepers warned that this time, the Devourers would not be caught off guard. They had waited as long as humanity, preparing, adapting, and multiplying in the dark. And now the signals coming from the edge of the solar system confirmed the worst. The enemy was near. At first, the leaders doubted. They argued that the stories were nothing more than myths, exaggerated tales turned into warnings over time. But when the scientists revealed their latest data, doubt fell away. Strange objects had been detected moving just beyond Neptune, enormous shapes unlike any asteroid or comet. They traveled in formation, too fast, too deliberate to be natural. And they were heading toward Earth. The shadows that once haunted humanity's past were returning, just as the keepers had warned. Panic swept across the councils of power. Some demanded immediate alliance with the warships, hoping to awaken them fully and turn them into an army under human command. Others feared trying to control them would trigger disaster, for the guardians were not servants but creations bound only to their ancient purpose. The people too were divided. Some prayed to the guardians for salvation, convinced that these machines were gods reborn. Others prepared for the end, believing no machine could stop what was coming. Rumors spread of cults forming in cities, people painting the symbols of the warships on walls, chanting that the Devourers would cleanse the world of the unworthy. Meanwhile, the warships themselves stirred restlessly. Their weapons hummed, their lights pulsed, and their shadows stretched across the land like warnings. Each pulse they released seemed to grow sharper, carrying coded signals not only into space but into the very minds of humans sensitive enough to hear. Soldiers stationed near them reported visions of stars burning, of fleets colliding in endless night. Civilians who lived near the giants spoke of dreams where voices whispered in languages they did not understand. It was as if the guardians were preparing humanity's minds for what was to come. The enemy was not only physical. It was something greater, something that could crush the spirit as easily as the flesh. The keepers explained that in the First War, humanity had barely survived because of one truth: the Devourers did not expect resistance. They believed Earth to be just another world to consume. This time, they would come prepared, knowing of the Guardians and knowing of humanity's will. The only question was whether humanity could rise again to meet them, or whether it had grown too divided, too fragile, too lost in its own struggles to stand united. The leaders listened, but their fear blinded them. Instead of uniting, nations began to arm themselves against each other, desperate to claim the Guardians' power. Skirmishes broke out near the sites of Awakening. Soldiers clashed not with the enemy from the stars but with their own kind, trying to control what could not be controlled. The Guardians remained silent witnesses, their weapons aimed only at the sky, as if ignoring the childish struggles of the humans below. But the signals from deep space grew louder. Astronomers tracked enormous fleets, vast enough to blot out entire constellations when they passed. The Devourers were not hiding anymore. They were coming openly, as if daring humanity to resist. The whispers across the stars had turned into a roar. And still the Guardians waited, silent and still, as if testing whether humanity itself was ready. The forgotten enemy was no longer forgotten. It was approaching fast, and the Builder's warning had come true. The shadows of the past were moving again. The sky was no longer empty. For weeks the astronomers had warned that strange objects were moving toward the solar system, and now the truth could be seen with the naked eye. At night, the stars did not shine as they once did. Patterns of light shifted, constellations blurred, and shadows moved across the heavens. Then came the first undeniable sign. Strange shapes appeared at the edge of telescopes, ships, countless in number, larger than mountains, moving together like a swarm of predators. They were the Devourers, and their arrival ended all doubt. Humanity could no longer argue about myths or legends. The forgotten enemy was real, and it was here. Across Earth, panic spread like fire. Crowds filled the streets, some screaming, some praying, others frozen in silence as the skies glowed with unfamiliar lights. Governments declared emergencies, militaries mobilized, but none of it mattered. Their tanks, their planes, their bombs were dust compared to what was coming. All eyes turned to the Guardians, the ancient warships that had risen from sea and stone. The people begged for them to act, to rise into the sky and face the threat. Yet the Guardians remained still, their weapons humming, their lights burning, but their bodies unmoving. It was as if they were waiting for something, a signal or a test. The Keepers believed they knew why. They explained to the frightened leaders that the Guardians were not tools of obedience. They would not move until humanity proved itself worthy to stand beside them. If humanity fractured, if it descended into chaos, the Guardians might choose silence and let the enemy consume the world. "They are not here to save us," one Keeper whispered. "They are here to judge us." The words spread quickly, chilling all who heard them. Above the world, the Devourers sent their first message. It was not in words, but in an action that needed no translation. A colony on the edge of the solar system, a small outpost built for mining, was erased in a single burst of light. No debris remained, no survivors escaped. Only silence and dust. The message was clear: they had come to devour again. Humanity trembled. The Guardians stirred. Their lights grew brighter, their weapons aligned, their massive hulls shifted for the first time since their awakening. Across the world, the ground shook as each Guardian released a single pulse into the sky. Together, their signals formed a network, a shield of energy that wrapped around the Earth like a cocoon. The night sky glowed with strange colors as the shield spread. For the first time, humanity realized the Guardians were not asleep. They were awake, watching, preparing. The question was not whether they would fight. The question was whether they would fight for humanity or for themselves. In cities, people fell to their knees, shouting in awe as the sky burned with the colors of the shield. Some cried that salvation had come. Others screamed that judgment was near. Soldiers who had once aimed their weapons at the Guardians now lowered them, humbled by the giant's power. Leaders who had once fought each other stared at the shield with fear, realizing that their struggles were meaningless before the enemy that had arrived. The Devourers did not stop. Their fleets moved closer, darkening the skies with their vast forms. The first warship at the edge of Earth's shield appeared like a black eclipse, blotting out the stars. For a moment, silence ruled. Then, with a sound like the cracking of the heavens, the Devourers struck. Their weapons slammed against the shield, shaking the earth, boiling the oceans, and turning night into day. The Guardians answered with a roar that shook every heart. From oceans, deserts and mountains, they fired beams of light and energy that split the heavens. The battle had begun. But the Guardians did not all rise into space. Some remained still, their lights flickering as if in doubt. It was as if they were waiting for humanity to prove its unity before joining the fight. Panic and courage clashed on Earth. Some humans rushed to aid the Guardians, sending supplies, building connections, trying to become part of the defense. Others hid in fear, or worse, tried to sabotage rival nations, even as the world itself was burning. The Guardians seemed to notice. One of them, the great ship in the Pacific, sent a different kind of pulse. This one reached not the sky but the minds of the people. Those who felt it dropped to their knees, overwhelmed by visions of fire and stars. They saw Earth destroyed, burned into ash. Then they saw another vision, Earth united, standing with the Guardians, pushing the enemy back into the void. The choice was clear. The Guardians were giving humanity a final chance. Unite and survive, or remain divided and fall. The battle above grew fiercer. The shield cracked under the endless assault. Explosions filled the heavens, and fragments of destroyed Devourer ships rained like meteors. Yet for every enemy destroyed, more arrived. The sky became a storm of fire, light, and shadows. The Guardians fought with fury, but the outcome was uncertain. On Earth, people watched the horizon glow with the reflection of war. They could only wonder if the Guardians were enough, or if their ancestors had left them to a fate they could never escape. And then came the final warning. The Guardians released one last global pulse, stronger than all before. It echoed in every machine, every radio, every human mind. Its message was clear and terrible. The war has begun. Stand with us, or perish with the earth. Humanity froze, caught between fear and hope, knowing that this was no longer a story of the past. It was the present, and their survival depended not only on the Guardians but on themselves. Above the world, the Devourers gathered their strength for a final strike, their shadows blotting out the stars. The Guardians glowed with fire, preparing to unleash everything they had. And humanity, trembling beneath the burning sky, could only wait for the choice that would decide its fate.